بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن تبعه بإحسان إلى يوم الدين اللهم لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Welcome to lesson number 5 of the video series Arabic Grammar for Understanding the Quran. Continuing with our discussion of Arabic verbs, in the past 3 lessons we talked about al-fi'l al-madi, the past tense, as well as al-fi'l mudari' al-marfu'. Now in this lesson we'll be learning, finally, the mansub and the majzoom cases for the present tense. We'll also be discussing those special conditions, or as I like to call them, those special factors that require us to use the mansub and the majzoom cases. And we'll also be learning the markers, the alamat for the marfu', the mansub, and the majzoom. And finally, we'll be taking a look at the Arabic verbal noun, the masdar. So inshallah, by the end of this lesson today, we would have acquired a solid handle, a solid grip over all of these topics: the past tense, the present tense and its 3 case endings, as well as the masdar, the verbal noun. So here are the contents for today's lesson. Right off the bat, we'll be looking at the Arabic verbal noun, the masdar, and looking at some examples drawn from the Quran. Afterwards, we'll be learning some verb forms. Now, you might recall from lesson number 2 that I introduced the concept of the awzan, but in this lesson, we'll actually be learning form 2, 3, 4, and 5. Form 2, 3, 4, and 5, 4 forms. And then in the following lesson, lesson number 6, we'll be looking at forms 6, 7, 8, and 10. Topic number 3, we'll be looking at the difference between words that have variable case endings as well as verbs that take fixed case endings. Al-kalimat al-mu'raba wal-kalimat al-mamniya. Topic number 4, we'll be learning the markers, the alamat for al-fi'l mudari' al-marfu'. And then topics 5 and 6 are al-fi'l mudari' al-mansub and al-fi'l mudari' al-majzoom. We'll be looking at the markers for each as well as the special factors that require us to use each. So let us begin, inshallah. Topic number 1, the verbal noun, the masdar. The Arabic masdar, plural masadir, is an ism. Okay, it's an ism, it is a noun. It is the noun form of the verb or the act of the verb, the action of the verb, or the concept of the verb. So these are 3 different ways to think about the masdar: the noun form of the verb, the act of the verb, or the concept of the verb. In English, the closest equivalent would be the gerund. So if you're familiar with English grammar, you have gerunds and infinitives, which function as nouns. The verbal noun would probably be the gerund in English. Let's look at some examples. Here are 2 sentences in English. Number 1, college students read every day. College students read every day. The word read, highlighted in blue, is a verb. It describes an action. But then we have sentence number 2, reading is fun. So the word reading, highlighted in red, is a gerund. Its function is the subject of the sentence and it's treated like a noun. Example number 2, I traveled the world versus tourists enjoy traveling. Notice again that the word traveled, highlighted in blue, is a verb. But the word traveling, in the context of this sentence, tourists enjoy traveling, is a noun. It's actually the direct object of the verb enjoy. So, read and traveled are verbs. Reading and traveling are verbal nouns. And just like we make this distinction between verbs and verbal nouns in English, we also have that distinction in Arabic between the fi'l and the masdar. Now let's look at some examples of verbs and their associated masadir in Arabic. Hopefully this will give you a better idea of what the masdar actually means. The verb balagha yablughu means to come or to arrive. Its associated verbal noun, masdar, is al-bulugh, which means the arrival. Jahila yajhalu means to not know or to be ignorant. The associated verbal noun is al-jahl, which means ignorance. Shafa yashfi means to heal or to cure someone of a sickness. Its verbal noun, its masdar, is ash-shifa, which means the cure or healing, the process of curing or healing someone. Again, the masdar, the verbal noun, is the noun version of the verb. It's the action of the verb or the concept of the verb. Let's now go over some examples pulled straight out of verses from the Quran. In the interest of time, I've decided not to translate or not to necessarily translate each and every example. So I would highly encourage and recommend that you follow along using an English translation of the Quran. You can use tanzil.net or a hard copy of the English translation, whatever you prefer. Example number 1, Rahmatan min Rabbik innahu huwa sami'ul alim. The masdar here is rahma, which means mercy. This comes from the verb rahima yarham, to show mercy or to show compassion. Example number 2, yafqahu qawli. The masdar here is qawl, from the verb qala yaqulu, to say. Qawl means speech or statement or word. So it can mean any of these three definitions depending on the context of the ayah. ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابُ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهِ هُدًى لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. The masdar here is huda, or hudan, actually. Hudan, which means guidance, comes from the verb hada yahdi, al-huda, which means to guide. وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ خَلْقُ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. The masdar here is khalq, which means creation, the process or the act of creating, from the verb خَلَقَ يَخْلُقُ, to create. فَتَمَنَّوُا الْمَوْتَ إِن كُنْتُمْ صَادِقِينَ. The masdar is maut, which means death, from the verb mata yamutu, which means to die. Mata yamutu al-maut. وَمَنْ يَكْفُرْ بِالْإِيمَانِ فَقَدْ حَبِطَ عَمَلُهُ. The masdar here is al-iman, which means faith or belief, which comes from the form foreverb آمَنَ يُؤْمِنُ, which means to believe. وَلَا يَحْزُنكَ الَّذِينَ يُسَارِعُونَ فِي الْكُفْرِ. Al-kufr, which means disbelief, is the masdar, coming from the verb كَفَرَ يَكْفُرُ, to disbelieve. And finally, فَمَنْ تَبِعَ هُدَايَ فَلَا خَوْفٌ عَلَيْهِمْ وَلَا هُمْ يَحْزَنُونَ. The word khawf is the masdar for the verb خَافَ يَخُوفُ, meaning to fear. So the word khawf means fear. These are all very common words that appear with high frequency in the Quran. Now, I have no doubt that you've come across, heard of, or perhaps even know the meanings of all of these words. These are very common words, like I said. What you may not have known before was that these are all verbal nouns. Rahma, qawl, hudan, khalq, maut, iman, kufr, khawf. Words like Islam. These are all verbal nouns, masadir, noun forms of their respective verbs. So that concludes our discussion of the verbal noun, the masdar in Arabic. Now it's time for us to switch gears and move on to al-awzan, the verb forms. If you haven't viewed the previous lessons 1, 2, 3, and 4, or you are rusty on these topics that I've covered previously, I would highly recommend that you go back, watch these lessons again right now before proceeding. So go ahead and click on the links that will direct you to the appropriate lessons. Now, there's a side comment that I wish to make, and that is verb forms, the awzan, are very, very, very important. The awzan are very important. Now, I know I've said this for so many things before, but verb forms would definitely, hands down, rank as the number one single most important item on your must-know list. As a beginner and intermediate student of the Arabic language, it is hands down the number one most important item. If this is the first time in your life encountering verb forms, or the first time that you've been formally introduced to verb forms, then I must say I feel very privileged and honored to be that individual to introduce this to you. That's how important verb forms are. If you learn verb forms well, you'll be doing yourself a tremendous favor for the rest of your life. In this lesson, we'll be learning forms 2, 3, 4, and 5. Awzan 2, 3, 4, and 5. And this is the format I'll be using to teach this information to you. On the top, we'll have the form. Now, keep in mind that a form consists of three components. We have al-madi, the past tense, al-mudari', the present tense, and the masdar, the verbal noun. And we have a stencil for each using the placeholder roots fa, ayn, lam, fa'ala. So this will be displayed on the top. To the bottom left-hand corner, I will have a list of special notes. These are special observations about characteristics or traits unique to this particular form. And then to the bottom right-hand corner, I will have a chart displaying common verbs of that form found in the Quran. So let's begin by reviewing form 1. Actually, one more thing. So the best way to learn these verb forms, especially the harder ones, 2, 3, 4, etc. Best way to learn, you have two strategies. Number one is to listen, to repeat and listen to the sound, listen to the phonetics. And number two is by way of example, looking for representative verbs of each form. So let's review form 1. Form 1 in the Madi can be fa'ala or fa'ila or fa'ula. In the Mudari', yaf'alu, yaf'ilu, or yaf'ulu. So form 1 is the simplest form. It only consists of 3 letters. Those are the 3 radicals, the 3 root letters of the word. The middle vowel is variable. This means that you can have either a fatha, a dhamma, or a kasra on top of the ayn. And the middle vowel in the past tense and the present tense may not necessarily be the same. So we talked about this in lesson number 4. You can have ضرب يضرب, fatha, kasra. You can have shahida yashhad, kasra, fatha. You can have kataba yaktub, or you can have cases where they are the same. So there's no way for us to predict the middle vowel. There's also no way for us to predict the verbal noun, the masdar. There's so many different forms. So you can have kataba yaktub al-kitabah. You can have qara'a yaqra al-qira'ah. Qala yaqulu al-qawl. Rahima yarham al-rahma. So as you can tell, there are so many different types of masadir for form 1. You just have to memorize it. So form 1 is tricky because the past tense, the present tense, and the verbal noun must be memorized all together as a set. There's no way for us to predict the middle vowel, and there is no way for us to predict the masdar. Here are some common form 1 verbs found in the Quran. Ja'ala yaj'alu al-ja'al, which means to make. Khalaqa yakhluq al-khalq, to create. ظلم يظلم الظلم, to wrong or to oppress. علم يعلم العلم, to know. عمل يعمل العمل, to work or to do. Okay, let's start form 2. Form 2 sounds like this. فعل for the Madi, يفعل for the Mudari', التفعيل for the Masdar. فعل يفعل التفعيل, فعل يفعل التفعيل. Notice the unique characteristic about form 2 is the shadda. The shadda on top of the middle root letter. This creates a doubling of the sound or delay in the sound. فعل يفعل. Form 2 is transitive. This means it usually takes at least one direct object. So the action of the verb is performed or done to something or someone. Form 2 also adds a causative meaning to form 1, which means you're causing someone to do something. And an example of this would be, let's say, form 1, alima ya'lam, which means to know. If we change that into form 2 by adding a shadda, it becomes allama yu'allimu at-ta'lim, to cause someone to know, which means to teach. So the word allama in form 2 means to teach. Another example, thabata yathbut, means to be firm or strong in form 1. In form 2, thabbata yuthabbitu at-tathbit, means to make someone strong, to strengthen, or to make something strong, like a case or a claim. So it means to confirm or to substantiate. So thabbata means to strengthen or to confirm and substantiate something. So those are examples of form 2 verbs adding a causative meaning to form 1, making someone or something do the action of form 1. In some cases, form 2 can also be an intensification of form 1. For example, qatala yaqtul means to kill, to murder in form 1. Form 2, qattala yuqattilu at-taqtil, is an intensification of that, and that means to massacre. So qattala actually means to massacre. Here are some examples of common form 2 verbs found in the Quran. Kadhaba yukadhibu at-takdhib means to call someone a liar or to reject. Adhaba yu'adhibu at-ta'dhib, to punish or to torment. Bashara yubashiru at-tabshir, to give glad tidings, to give good news. Sabbaha yusabbihu at-tasbih, to praise or to glorify. Nazzala yunazzilu at-tanzil, to send down, to reveal. So for each form that we'll be covering, forms 2, 3, 4, and 5, I've decided to pick one verb for us to conjugate in the past tense and in the present tense. And this is to illustrate that the conjugation rules we've learned in lessons 2, 3, and 4 for the past and present tense apply to all verb forms. And this is a point I've been repeating over and over again. These conjugation rules apply to all forms. So we'll be demonstrating that using this slide. Now, before we start, I would like you to listen. Again, listen very carefully to the sounds. Listen to the relationship between the stencil, the fa'ala, and the actual verb. And listen for the defining trait, that special, unique characteristic about the form. In this case, it's the shadda, that delay, that doubling of the sound. Also, you'll notice that I've omitted the pronouns, the standalone personal pronouns, huwa, hum, hiya, hunna, etc. This is to give us a chance to actually practice and apply the strategy of memorizing the chart, which I mentioned in lesson 4. So let's start. If we have the root letters kaf, tha, and ba applied to form 2, this gives us the verb kadhaba. Fa'ala kadhaba. Fa'alu kadhabu. Fa'alat kadhabat. فعلنا كذبنا فعلت كذبت فعلتم كذبتم فعلت كذبت فعلتن كذبتن فعلت كذبت فعلنا كذبنا. So that's the past tense. Moving on to the mudari', the present tense. Yufa'ilu, yukadhibu. Yufa'iluna, yukadhibuna. Tufa'ilu, tukadhibu. Yufa'ilna, yukadhibna. Tufa'ilu, tukadhibu. تفعلون تكذبون تفعلين تكذبين تفعلن تكذبن أفعل أكذب نفعل نكذب. A Of course, I've chosen to slow down, to enunciate, and to exaggerate the sounds and the vowels, and that's because I'm teaching this material. So I want you to pay attention to the phonetics. Now, of course, in real life, I wouldn't be speaking so slowly and, pulling the vowels or pulling the sounds. Here are some examples, some real examples of Form 2 verbs taken straight from the Quran in the context of different ayats. يا أيها النبي لما تحرم ما أحل الله لك. The verb تحرم is a Form 2 verb following the pattern تفعل حرم يحرم التحريم. هو الذي أيدك بنصره وبالمؤمنين. أيد, the verb أيد يؤيد التأييد following the pattern فعل يفعل التفعيل. Notice the shadda, pay attention to the shadda on top of the Form 2 verb. وألف بين قلوبهم. ألف يؤلف التأليف, Form 2. كذبت قبلهم قوم نوح وعاد وفرعون ذو الأوتاد. كذبت, this is conjugated for هي in the past tense. The verb is كذب يكذب التكذيب. Now moving on to Form 3. The Form 3 set, فاعل يفاعل المفاعلة. فاعل in the ماضي, يفاعل in the مضارع, المفاعلة in the masdar. So what do you observe that is unique about this verb form in terms of sound? It's the alif, right? The elongation, the sound that we attach to the first root letter, فاعل. Form 3 adds an associative meaning to Form 1. So an example would be the Form 1 verb عمل يعمل, to work or to do. In Form 3, we would have عامل يعامل المعاملة, which means to deal or to treat in terms of dealing or treating someone. So mu'amala describes relationships, dealing with people. Another possible verbal noun form, another masdar for Form 3 is al-fi'al. Al-fi'al. So you can have al-mufa'ala or al-fi'al. That's another alternative. Here are some examples of Form 3 verbs found in the Quran. To struggle, جاهد يجاهد المجاهدة or الجهاد. قاتل يقاتل المقاتلة القتال, which means to fight or to combat. هاجر يهاجر المهاجرة, which means to emigrate. Past tense conjugation for Form 3. Using the root letters jim, ha, and dal, we have jahada, which means he struggled. Jahada, fa'ala, jahada. Fa'alu, jahadu. Fa'alat, jahadat. Fa'alna, jahadna. Fa'alta, jahadta. فاعلتم جاهدتم. فاعلت جاهدت. فاعلتن جاهدتن. فاعلت جاهدت. فاعلنا جاهدنا. Again, the defining characteristic of Form 3 is that elongation, that alif after the first root letter. Present tense conjugation for Form 3 using the same verb. يفاعل يجاهد. يفاعلون يجاهدون. تفاعل تجاهد. يفاعلن يجاهدن. تفاعل تجاهد. تفاعلون تجاهدون. تفاعلين تجاهدين. تفاعلن تجاهدن. أفاعل أجاهد. نفاعل نجاهد. Examples of Form 3 verbs taken from the Quran. In Surah Al-Baqarah, وَقَاتِلُوا فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ الَّذِينَ يُقَاتِلُونَكُمْ. Here we have two instances of the verb قَاتَلَ. The first one is actually a fi'l amr, a command. And then here we have يُقَاتِلُونَ fi'l مضارع مرفوع. قَاتَلَ فَاعَلَ. يُقَاتِلُ يُفَاعِلُ. Form 3. Now pay attention to the alif sound. وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَهَاجَرُوا وَجَاهَدُوا فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ. هَاجَرَ and جَاهَدَ. Form 3 verbs. أَلَمْ تَرَ إِلَى الَّذِينَ نَافَقُوا. أَلَمْ تَرَ إِلَى الَّذِينَ نَافَقُوا. نَافَقَ. Form 3 with the alif. إِلَّا الَّذِينَ عَاهَدتُّم مِّنَ الْمُشْرِكِينَ ثُمَّ لَمْ يَنقُصُوكُمْ شَيْئًا وَلَمْ يُظَاهِرُوا عَلَيْكُمْ أَحَدًا. عَاهَدَ, we have عَاهَدتُّم conjugated for أنتم in the past tense, and then we have يُظَاهِرُ يُظَاهِرُ. So these are all Form 3 verbs taken from the Quran. Now let's move on to Form 4. The Form 4 set. أفعل يفعل الإفعال. أفعل يفعل الإفعال. What do we notice? We notice that there is a hamza in the front. We've added a hamza to the front of the verb, but only in the past tense, أفعل, and in the masdar, al-if'al. The hamza disappears in the form, present tense form, يفعل. Now, Form 4 is somewhat similar to Form 2 in that both are transitive. So Form 2 and 4 generally take at least one direct object. And Form 4 also has this causative meaning effect. It adds a causative meaning to Form 1. So let's look at some examples of Form 4. These are common Form 4 verbs in the Quran. أخرج يخرج الإخراج. So the Form of one verb of this would be خرج, to leave or to exit. Form 4, أخرج, means to make someone leave, which means to expel, to drive someone out. So أخرج means to expel, to kick someone out of their home, for example, or it can mean to bring out, to publicize, like a piece of information. Another example of the causative meaning is Form 1 verb, فَسَدَ يَفْسِد. فَسَدَ يَفْسِد means to be bad or to be spoiled. Now converting that to Form 4, أَفْسَدَ يُفْسِدُ الْإِفْسَاد, to make something bad, to cause something to be bad, which means to corrupt or to cause mischief. أَفْسَدَ يُفْسِد الْإِفْسَاد. But anyway, going back to Form 4 verbs in the Quran, we have أخرج يخرج الإخراج, to drive someone out, to expel. أرسل يرسل الإرسال, very, very common verb, meaning to send. أشرك يشرك الإشراك, to associate partners, to commit shirk. أسلم يسلم الإسلام, to submit. So the word Islam literally means submission, right? It's the masdar for the verb أسلم, submission. أراد يريد الإرادة, to want or to desire. Now this verb is slightly irregular because it is hollow, so it doesn't perfectly fit onto the pattern, but it's pretty close. أراد أفعل, يفعل يريد. It's just that the middle letter has swallowed part of the vowel, so you have yuridu in elongation instead of yuf'ilu. And irada has a ta marbuta at the very end. This is a Form 4 verb. So the reason I put it on here, even though we haven't learned hollow verbs, is because this is very, very common in the Quran. It comes up all the time. Form 4, past tense conjugation, using the root letters sin, lam, and mim. We have aslama. So af'ala huwa aslama. Af'alu aslamu. أفعلت أسلمت. أفعلنا أسلمنا. أفعلت أسلمت. أفعلتم أسلمتم. أفعلت أسلمت أفعلتن أسلمتن أفعلت أسلمت أفعلنا أسلمنا. In the present tense, يفعل يسلم يفعلون يسلمون تفعل تسلم يفعلن يسلمن تفعل تسلم تفعلون تسلمون تفعلين تسلمين تفعلن تسلمن أفعل أسلم نفعل نسلم. Form 4 verbs taken from the Quran. يريدون أن يطفئوا نور الله بأفواههم. So we have the verb يريدون, they want or they desire. Form 4 verb. قال أسلمت لرب العالمين. أسلمت, right? أفعلت. والله أركسهم بما كسبوا. أركس أفعل. إنا أرسلنا نوحا إلى قومه. أرسلنا أفعلنا. So again, the defining characteristics of form 4 is that there is a hamza at the very front in the past tense, and then in the present tense, we have yuf'ilu. Yuf'ilu, the fa, the first root letter actually takes a sukoon, and then in the masdar we have the hamza again, al-if'al. Last form for today, form 5. Form 5. This is the form 5 set. For the Maldi, تفعل تفعل. المضارع يتفعل. المصدر التفعل. تفعل يتفعل التفعل. What do we notice? What have we added? Well, we've added two things. Number one, we've fixed a ta to the very front of the verb. And number two, we've added a shadda on top of the middle root letter. So there's a ta in the front, and then we have a shadda on top of the ayn. Tafa'ala, tafa'ala. The meaning of form 5 is very interesting. It adds a reflexive meaning to form 2. So we have the form 2 verb, and then if you do the action to yourself, performing the action on oneself, that is the meaning of form 5. So it's reflexive. An example would be form 2 verb, ذكر. ذكر يذكر التذكير, which means to remind someone. Form 5, تذكر يتذكر التذكر. You're doing the action to yourself, so to remind oneself. What does that mean? It means to remember. To remember. So form 5, تذكر means to remember. Here's some common form 5 verbs found in the Quran. Like I just said, تذكر يتذكر التذكر, to remind oneself or to remember. توكل يتوكل التوكل, to place one's trust in someone or something. تبين يتبين التبين, to become clear. Conjugation for form 5 in the past tense, using the root letters the, kaf, and ra. We have تذكر, تذكر, to remember. تفعل تذكر. تفعلوا تذكروا. تفعلت تذكرت. تفعلن تذكرن. Again, pay attention to the ta, the sound of the ta in the very front, and the sound of the shadda, right? That small delay in the pronunciation of the word. That tells you there's a shadda. Those are the defining unique characteristics of form 5. تفعلت تذكرت. تفعلتم تذكرتم. تفعلت تذكرت. تفعلتن تذكرتن. تفعلت تذكرت تفاعلنا تذكرنا. Form 5 in the present tense, same verb, يتفاعل يتذكر يتفاعلون يتذكرون تتفاعل تتذكر يتفاعلن يتذكرن تتفاعل تتذكر تتفاعلون تتذكرون تتفاعلين تتذكرين تتفاعلن تتذكرن أتفاعل أتذكر نتفاعل نتذكر. Examples of Form 5 verbs taken from the Quran. أفلا تتذكرون أفلا تتذكرون. Notice how there are two tas in front. So one of the tas belongs to the Form 5 stencil. The other ta belongs to the pattern. تفعلون. It's part of the أنتم conjugation. Example number 2. أفلا يتدبرون القرآن يتدبرون يتفعلون ليغفر لك الله ما تقدم من ذنبك وما تأخر. So we have two verbs in this ayah, both are Form 5, تقدم and تأخر. So the root letters are قاف, دال and ميم, and hamza, خاء and ra. Last example, فقالوا على الله توكلنا. A very common verb in the Quran, tawakkala. We have different forms of this. You have mutawakkilun, which is ism fa'il, but this is something we'll learn in the future, inshallah. Now, this brings us to the end of our discussion of al-awzan in today's lesson. We've covered forms 2, 3, 4, and 5. Here is a summary chart. I want you to please memorize this chart. And again, the two strategies for doing so, number 1, to repeat. So repeat these to yourself out loud. فَعَلَ يُفَعِّلُ التَّفْعِيل, focusing on the sounds. So if you need to enunciate or to exaggerate the sounds, do that. Do that. That's what my teachers have recommended me to do when I was learning this. For example, in Form 3, you have فَعَلَ, there's an elongation, make it long, make it extra long so you know it's there. Okay, that's how you train your ears to pick up these cues. Form 5, تفاعل تفاعل, enunciate the ta and the shadda. Strategy number 2, learn using examples. So go back to the previous slides and look at those examples. Open up the Mus'haf, the Quran, and pick a page and just look for these verbs. Okay, look for these patterns. The more you see real life examples, the faster you'll be able to master these verb forms. Okay, we're going to switch gears and move on to a new topic, the topic of markers. And I feel this is the right time for me to introduce a new concept, the concept of variable case endings versus fixed case endings. Al-kalimat al-mu'raba wal-kalimat al-mabniya. If you use classical grammar texts or classical curricula, you will definitely cover this topic and use these terms, mu'araba and mabniya. I'm going to try to break this down in the simplest way possible. Arabic words can be categorized into two groups in terms of case endings. Group number 1, mu'araba. Group number 2, mabniya. Mu'araba words have variable case endings. Variable case endings. Why are they variable? Because the ending depends on the word's function or role in the sentence, or on the presence of special factors. So an example would be the word kitab. You can have kitabun, kitaban, or kitabin. That is a variable case ending. The ending of the word is different depending on the word's function or the presence of special factors. Category number 2, mabniya, al-kalimat al-mabniya. These words have fixed case endings. These are constant, unchanging. That means the ending is completely unaffected by the word's function or role in the sentence or by the presence of special factors. So basically, these words endings don't really care about what's going on in the context or in the sentence. They are fixed. They're not going to change. So those are the key terms. Mu'raba means variable case endings. Mabniya means fixed case endings. Okay, now you might be wondering which words belong in which category. So on the top we have the box al-kalimat. This is the gross totality of all words in the Arabic language. We can break this down into al-mu'raba, variable case endings, or al-mabniya, fixed case endings, the two major umbrella groups. Under al-mu'raba, we have two categories as well. We have al-af'al al-mudari', this is the present tense. And we have most asma. You can think of these as nouns. So most nouns, or most asma rather, all words in Arabic that we would consider nouns in English are mu'raba. They take variable case endings. What are the case endings for the present tense, for al-af'al al-mudari', except for the feminine plural? We have marfu', mansub, and majzoom. So we've mentioned in passing that these are the three case endings for the present tense. And then for asma, we also have different case endings. We have marfu', mansub, and something called the majrur. So notice how the marfu' and the mansub are shared between verbs and nouns, but we have the majzoom, which is unique to the present tense verb, and the majrur tense, which is unique to the ism. And we'll talk about this in much more detail later. Depending on the case, we have a unique and appropriate marker for the word, alama. So each of these cases, the marfu', the mansub, and the majzoom, the marfu', the mansub, and the majrur will take an appropriate alama. What about the mabniya category? Mabniya words include al-madi, the past tense. Okay, so all past tense verbs are mabniya. They are fixed in their case ending. We have al-dhama'ir, the pronouns, huwa, whom, hiya, anta, antuma, antum, anti, antunna. All these are fixed mabniya. So anta is always going to be anta, regardless of the context, regardless of any special factors around it. And we have others as well. And of course, the feminine plural present tense. So the hunna and the antunna verbs, yaf'alna and taf'alna, those are considered mabniya. They are fixed. They don't take variable case endings like other present tense verbs do. Also note that the term alama, meaning marker, is used only for mu'raba words, only for this category right here. Words that are mabniya do not take markers, do not take alamat. What are markers? Markers are of two types. They can either be letters, huruf, or they can also be harakat, short vowels. Now this depends on the word, it also depends on the case. What are the huruf? They are alif, ya, noon, and waw. Alif, ya, noon, and waw. That is your selection of huruf for markers. The harakat, fatha, dhamma, kasra, and sukun. Or kasra, dhamma, fatha, and sukun. These are the short vowels. And again, the term alama or marker is used only for words that are only for words that are mu'raba, not for words that are mabniya. So we are now ready to formally tackle case endings. Here are the case ending markers, the alamat for al-fi' al-mudari' al-marfu', which we've covered in the last lesson. Now, the present tense can actually be broken down into three groups. The first group, taf'alna and yaf'alna. These are the verbs for hunna and antunna, the feminine plural verbs. Like I mentioned previously, these are mabniya, they are fixed, which means we don't distinguish between marfu', mansub, or majzoom, because in all cases, in all conditions, in all contexts, these are going to be the same. Their forms are fixed. And this noon is called noon an-niswa. Noon an-niswa, the feminine plural noon. This noon is permanently attached, okay, it never comes off. Now let's look at the other two groups of present tense verbs that are mu'raba. We have in one group yaf'alu, af'alu, naf'alu, and taf'alu. These are the verbs for the pronouns huwa, ana, nahnu, hiya, and anta. The marker for these verbs in the marfu' is the dhamma at the end. Yaf'alu, af'alu, naf'alu, and taf'alu. The second class of mu'raba verbs are the verbs for whom, anti, and antum. Yaf'aluna, taf'alina, taf'aluna. What's the marker for the marfu'? The marker is called thubut an-nun. Thubut an-nun, which is translated roughly as the presence of the nun. So here we have a letter, a harf, as the marker. And over here we have the dhamma, a haraka, a short vowel, as the marker. Notice that this nun in yaf'aluna is not the same nun as in yaf'alna. This nun is a marker and it can actually be dropped. This nun, however, is permanently fixed. One side note, for this group over here, we also have the two dual verbs, yaf'alani and taf'alani. These will be covered in lesson number 6, inshallah. So for now, don't worry about this so much. Just remember that for the present tense, we can have 3 categories. 2 are mu'raba. One of them takes the dhamma as a marker. The other takes the presence of the nun, thubut and nun, as the marker. And the third category, the feminine plural verbs, are mabniya. They are fixed. Now we'll be looking at some examples of al-fi'l al-mudari' al-marfu' taken from the Quran. I want you to pay attention to the marker. Pay attention to the verb, first of all, and then pay attention to the marker. So the marker should either be a dhamma or a nun, depending on the verb itself. Example number 1, الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا يُقَاتِلُونَ فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ. What's the marker? The marker is the presence of the nun, thubut and nun. What's the form of this verb? يُقَاتِلُونَ, there's a long alif. يُفَاعِلُونَ, this is a form 3 verb. Example number 2, أَفَلَا تَعْقِلُونَ. تَعْقِلُونَ, we see that nun, this is conjugated for antum. So يُقَاتِلُونَ is conjugated for whom. تَعْقِلُونَ conjugated for antum. The marker is thubut and nun. And this is an example of a form 1 verb. Example number 3, يُفَصِّلُ الْآيَاتِ لِقَوْمٍ يَعْلَمُونَ. يُفَصِّلُ follows the pattern يُفَاعِلُ, and it takes a dhamma. So this is conjugated for huwa. The marker is a dhamma. This is an example of a form 2 verb because of the shadda. يُفَصِّلُ, يُفَاعِلُ. Of course, we have another verb here, يَعْلَمُونَ, a form 1. This is conjugated for whom. The marker is a nun. Next example, أَفَلَا يَتَدَبَّرُونَ الْقُرْآنَ. يَتَدَبَّرُونَ, we see the nun at the end. This is conjugated for whom. Hum يَتَدَبَّرُونَ. The alama is the presence of the nun. And this is an example of a form 5 verb. Last example, فَإِنَّكَ لَا تُسْمِعُ الْمَوْتَى. تُسْمِعُ, we see the dhamma at the end, and that is the marker for the marfu'. And this is an example of a form 4 verb. تُسْمِعُ, تُفْعِلُ. So notice how, again, we have 2 different markers. We have either the nun or the dhamma. The nun is used for those verbs conjugated for whom, antum, and anti. And the rest of the verbs take the dhamma. And also remember that al-marfu', the marfu' case is used in situations where there's nothing special going on. So it's the default case used when there are no special factors in the sentence. So that's that for the marfu'. Now let's move on to al-mansub. Al-fi'l al-mudari' al-mansub. In the presence of special factors called nawasib, the present tense case that we must use is the mansub case. We don't have a choice. In the presence of a nawasib, we have to use the mansub case, which means the verb must take a mansub marker. There are a total of 10 nawasib, 10 of these special factors that require us to use the mansub. And in this lesson right now, we'll be covering two of the most common ones, and they are an, the particle an, and lam ta'lil, lam ta'lil. What is lam ta'lil? In the phrase liyaf'ala, liyaf'ala, the lam fixed to the front of the verb, that is lam ta'lil. So definitions: an means that or to, and the precise meaning actually depends on the context, and it might depend on the verb preceding it, coming before it. What does lam ta'lil mean? It means in order to. So to as in order to, or so that. So the word ta'lil literally means justification or rationale. So lam ta'lil is the lam for justification. So these are two very common nawasib, and they require us to use the mansub case ending for the present tense. So what are the mansub markers? On the far right, we have a column containing the marfu' verbs. On the top, we have af'alu, yaf'alu, naf'alu, and taf'alu. The marker is the dhamma. On the bottom, yaf'aluna, taf'aluna, taf'alina, the marker being thubut and noon, the presence of the noon. Now let's see what happens. Let's observe what change occurs when we add a nasib. So let's add an in front of each verb and see what we have. We get an af'ala, an yaf'ala, an naf'ala, an taf'ala. What happens when we add lam ta'lil? We get li'af'ala, liyaf'ala, linaf'ala, litaf'ala. What do we notice? We notice that instead of a dhamma, we have a fatha on top of every last letter of the verb. What about the bottom category? Yaf'aluna, taf'aluna, taf'alina. When we add an in front of each verb, we get an yaf'alu, an taf'alu, an taf'ali. And when we add lam ta'lil, we have liyaf'alu, litaf'alu, litaf'ali. What do we observe that has changed? What's different? We've dropped the noon. So for yaf'aluna and taf'aluna, we've omitted or erased the noon, and we've left an alif at the end, an alif. But for anti, we simply drop the noon and leave it as a ya. So again, these are the two classes of present tense verbs that are mu'raba. The top one takes a fatha as the mansub marker, a fatha. In the presence of an or lam ta'lil or any nawasib, the fi'l mudari' must be mansub, and if it is conjugated for ana, huwa, nahnu, anta, or hiya, it must take a fatha as its alama. On the other hand, if we have conjugation for whom, antum, and anti, the marker for mansub is dropping the noon. Here is a summary of that information. Yaf'ala, af'ala, naf'ala, taf'ala. The marker here is the fatha for the mansub. On the other hand, for the verbs yaf'aluna, taf'alina, and taf'aluna in the marfu', in the mansub, we have to drop the noon, and this in Arabic is called hadf an-noon, and of course the hunna and antuna verbs are mabniya, they are fixed. In order to better illustrate what an and lam ta'lil actually mean, I'll be going over some examples in this slide of their usage. Inna Allaha ya'murukum an tadhbahu baqarah. Translation number 1. Indeed, Allah commands you to slaughter a cow. So here, an is translated as to. We have an followed by al-fi'l mudari' al-mansub tadhbahu. The marker is hadf an-nun, dropping the nun. Translation number 2, indeed Allah commands you that you slaughter a cow, that you slaughter a cow. So here an is translated as that. Now the first translation, Allah commands you to slaughter a cow, this is probably more familiar to you. This is a more colloquial, more direct way of expressing the same thought. But we can probably agree that the meaning is essentially the same between both. Believe it or not, translation number 2, indeed Allah commands you that you slaughter a cow, this is actually more correct grammatically, because an tazbahu, this is a conjugation for you, and that is reproduced in the English. But again, the meaning is basically the same. We're talking about the same thing. So it's a matter of preference, which translation you choose. Next example, فِيهِ رِجَالٌ يُحِبُّونَ أَن يَتَطَهَّرُوا. In it are men who love to purify themselves. And it here refers to the masjid. Now, it can be translated as to, or it can be translated as that. In it are men who love that they purify themselves. Same case as the above. Take home message, an means to or that. Now moving on to lam at-ta'lil. Lam at-ta'lil, the lam for justification or rationale. قَالَ أَخَرَقْتَهَا لِتُغْرِقَ أَهْلَهَا. He said, did you make a hole in it in order to drown its people? So the lam gives us an explanation, a justification for the previous action. Why did you make a hole in it? لِتُغْرِقَ أَهْلَهَا, in order to drown its people. So this is actually part of a longer conversation taking place between Musa alayhi salam and Khidr that occurs in Surah Al-Kahf. Next example, وَقَدَّرَهُ مَنَازِلَ لِتَعْلَمُوا عَدَدَ السِّنِينَ وَالْحِسَابِ لِتَعْلَمُوا. Here, the translation, and He, referring to Allah, and He has determined for it, i.e. the moon, phases, so that you may know the number of years and account of time. Why did Allah determine for it phases? لِمَاذَا قَدَّرَهُ مَنَازِلَ لِتَعْلَمُوا. In order, so that you may know. In order for you to know the number of years and the account of time. Take home message for lam ta'lil. The lam ta'lil answers the question why, لماذا, and its meaning is in order to and so that. So after an or after lam ta'lil, we have to use al-fi'l mudari' al-mansub. Al-fi'l mudari' al-mansub. Examples of al-fi'l mudari' al-mansub taken from the Quran. I want you to pay attention to two things, or three things. But number one, the nasib. What is the special factor that require us to use the mansub case ending? And number two, what is the marker? And finally, the form. So example number one, إِنَّا جَعَلْنَا مَا عَلَى الْأَرْضِ زِينَةً لَهَا لِنَبْلُوَهُمْ. In order that we may test you. So the nasib here is lam at-ta'lil. What is the marker? It is the fatha linabluwa. This is the verb bala yablu. We have a fatha because this is in the mansub because of the lam at-ta'lil. And nablu is a form, one verb. Example number two, يُرِيدُونَ أَن يُطْفِئُوا نُورَ اللَّهِ بِأَفْوَاهِهِمْ. The nasib is the an. What is the marker? The marker is the dropping of the noon, hadf an-noon. يُطْفِئُوا in al-marfu' is يُطْفِئُونَ. أَطْفَأَ يُطْفِئُ al-itfa. So this is an example of a form, example of a form 4 verb. And another clue that tells us that the marker is the dropping of the noon is that there's an alif left over. An alif left over next to a waw. So this is a very interesting relationship, very interesting construction that tells us that previously in the marfu' we had a noon, but it's dropped because of the nasib. وَإِذْ يَمْكُرُ بِكَ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا لِيُثْبِتُوكَ. Again, we have lam ta'lil, li, And the marker here is dropping of the noon. Dropping of the noon. لِيُثْبِتُوا. Where is the alif? Well, we don't have the alif because we've attached an objective pronoun, the kaf, but we still have that waw over there. It's a telltale sign that previously in the marfu' we had a noon. لِيُثْبِتُوا, لِيُفْعِلُوا. This is an example of a form 4 verb. لَإِن بَسَطْتَ إِلَيَّ يَدَكَ لِتَقْتُلَنِي. Lam ta'lil. The marker is the fatha, and this is a form 1 verb. هل أتبعك على أن تعلمني. We have an followed by fi'l mudari' mansub, تعلم, تعلما. So we see the fatha, that is the marker. And this is an example of form 2 verb, the shadda. علم يعلم تعلم. Finally, عسى ربكم أن يكفر عنكم سيئاتكم. We have the nasib an followed by al-fi'l mudari' mansub yukaffira with the marker fatha yukaffira. And this is again an example of a form 2 verb because of the shadda. كفر يكفر التكفير. So that's that for the mansub case ending. Now we'll be talking about the third and final fi'l mudari' case ending, the majzoom. In the presence of special factors called jawazim, the present tense verb must take the majzoom case, which means it also must take a majzoom marker. There are approximately 18 jawazim. 2 of the most common jawazim, which we will cover right now, are lam and lam al-amr. Lam and lam al-amr. So lam is used to negate the past, and lam al-amr is the lam for commands. The lam for commands. Notice how we also had lam at-ta'lil, which is a nasib, but lam al-amr is a jawazim. So there are different types of lam in Arabic, just like there are different types of ma. So you want to distinguish between these different types of lam because they require us to use different grammar rules. We have lam al-amr, lam at-ta'lil. We also have lam as harf jar, lam al-juhud, etc. What are the majzoom markers? Let's take a look. When we add lam in front of a verb, in front of af'alu, yaf'alu, naf'alu, or taf'alu, let's look at what we have. We get lam af'al, lam af'al, lam yaf'al, lam naf'al, and lam taf'al. When we add lam al-amr, the lam for commands, we get li af'al, li yaf'al, li naf'al, and li taf'al. When we add lam to yaf'aluna, taf'aluna, and taf'alina, we get lam yaf'alu. This is a typo. Lam yaf'alu, lam taf'alu, lam taf'ali. Adding lam al-amr, we get li yaf'alu, li taf'alu, and li taf'ali. So these are the 2 groups of present tense. The ones on the top originally took a dhamma in the marfu'. The ones on the bottom took a noon, thubut and noon in the marfu'. But when we add a jazim, such as lam or lam al-amr, the marker becomes, for the top, the sukoon. Lam af'al, li af'al. And for the bottom, the marker becomes hadf an-noon, dropping of the noon. Now you might be thinking to yourself, isn't this the same marker for the mansub? We also dropped the noon when we added an or lam ta'lil, right? We have an yaf'alu. Yes, that's exactly correct. Dropping of the noon, hadf an-noon, is the alama for the majzoom and for the mansub, for both of them, for these verbs, for the verbs conjugated for hum, antum, and anti. Here is a summary of the case ending markers for the majzoom: yaf'al, af'al, naf'al, and taf'al. That's the sukoon. And then for these verbs, yaf'alu, taf'ali, taf'alu, we have hadf an-noon, dropping of the noon. Important note down here, there's actually a third marker for the majzoom. There's a third marker, but it is seen relatively less often. So it's a little less common than these, which is why I decided to discuss it later. So don't worry too much about this. For now, just note that the majzoom markers are the sukun or dropping of the noon, hadf and noon. What does lam and lam al-amr mean? Let's go through some examples of their usage. Lam yadhhab, lam yadhhab. So lam is used to negate the past tense. Lam yadhhab is a construction composed of lam plus al-mudari' al-majzoom with a sukun. We can also say ma dhahaba, ma dhahaba. This construction consists of ma plus al-madi, the past tense. The meaning for both phrases is the same. He didn't go. So lam yadhhab and ma dhahaba are semantically equivalent. We're saying the same thing, but we're using a different grammar construction. Two ways to negate the past, same meaning, just different grammar. Lam yadhhab and ma dhahaba. So you'll see both in the Quran. You'll see lam plus fi'l mudari' majzoom or ma plus fi'l madi. What does lam al-amr mean? This is a very common construction you'll see in the Quran. Fal yaf'al, fal yaf'alu, fal yaf'al, fal yaf'alu. Now this entire phrase is actually a collection of three different components. There is a fa in the front, and then we see that lam with the sukun, and then yaf'al. So this lam is actually your lam al-amr. It's your lam al-amr, li yaf'al. When we put all three together, we have fa li yaf'al, but then we change the haraka into a sukun. So this is kind of like an abbreviation. Fal yaf'al. The product is fal yaf'al. The same thing for fal yaf'alu. Originally it's fali yaf'alu. Squeezing all three together into a single phrase, fal yaf'alu. An example from Surah Al-Quraysh, fal ya'budu, which means so let them worship. So lam al-amr is a command. The meaning is let. So let them worship. Or fal nadhhab, so let us go. Fal nadhhab, li nadhhab ila al-masjid, let us go to the masjid. Its function is as a command. And the verb following it must be in the majzoom case. Whenever you see or hear fal ya'budu, the following verb must be in the mudari' majzoom. So this is something to listen for in the Quran. To summarize, lam and lam al-amr are jawazim. When they occur before present tense, we have to use al-fi'l mudari' al-majzoom. Some examples of al-fi'l mudari' al-majzoom taken from the Quran. Pay attention to the jazim as well as the marker. يحسبون الأحزاب لم يذهبوا. The jazm here is lam, used to negate the past. يذهبوا. What did we do? We dropped the noon and left the waw with an alif. The marker is hadf and noon, dropping of the noon, and this is a form 1 verb. Example number 2. وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَلَمْ يُهَاجِرُوا. Again, lam is the jazm, and the marker here is dropping of the noon, hadf and noon. Yuhajiru, we see the alif. This tells us we have a form 3 verb. Hajara yuhajiruna, form 3. فَلْتَقُمْ طَائِفَةٌ مِّنْهُمْ مَعَكَ. So we have fal. This, like I described in the previous slide, is lam al-amr. In this construction, it takes the sukun. فَلْتَقُمْ. So the jazm is lam al-amr. What's the marker? The sukun on top of the noon. فَلْتَقُمْ. And this is an example of a form 1 verb. وَلْيَشْهَدْ عَذَابَهُمَا طَائِفَةٌ مِّنَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. So this is very similar to fal yaf'al, except instead of the fa, we have a waw. We have a waw, a different conjunction. Wal yashhad. But it's the same case. The lam al-amr now takes a sukun. Wa liyashhad, wal yashhad. This is lam al-amr as the jazim, and the alama is the sukun. This is a form 1 verb, yashhad. Last example, أَفَلَمْ يَسِيرُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ. We have lam as the jazim, dropping of the noon, yasiru. In the marfu' it's yasiruna, and then the form, this is a form 1 verb. So that concludes our discussion about the different alamat and the different nawasib and jawazim. So basically we have a very comprehensive, very complete background introduction to the present tense. We've covered all 3 cases, and we've covered those special conditions and factors that require us to use different cases, and we've also covered the different markers. So now I want to summarize all of that information because it's a lot of new information for you. I want to summarize it in 2 simple diagrams, inshallah. So diagram number 1, we're trying to answer the question, which present tense case do we use? Which present tense case do we use? Do we use the marfu', the mansub, or the majzoom? So this depends. We have the presence of special factors or the absence of special factors. If we don't have any special factors present, the default case always is the marfu'. If we do have special factors present, we must look at the factor and decide what is it. So if it's lam ta'lil or an or any nawasib, then we have to use the mansub. If the special factor is a jawazim, such as lam or lam al-amr, then we have to use the majzoom. Very, very simple flowchart. This allows us to figure out exactly which case ending to use. Now the next question is, after we decide which case to use, what's the correct marker? So diagram number 2 answers the question, which marker do we use? Organized by column, we have the 3 different cases, al-marfu', al-mansub, al-majzoom. And ordered by row, we have our pronouns broken down into 2 groups. On the top, we have huwa, hiya, anta, ana, and nahnu. Huwa yaf'al, hiya taf'al, anta taf'al, ana af'al, nahnu naf'al. These verbs, the verbs conjugated for these pronouns take the dhamma, fatha, and sukun markers for the marfu', mansub, and majzoom respectively. So these verbs take the short vowels, the harakat, dhamma, fatha, and sukun. On the other hand, if we have verbs conjugated for anti, antum, and hum, taf'alina, taf'aluna, and yaf'aluna, the marker for the marfu' is the presence of the noon, yaf'aluna, called thubut and noon, the presence of the noon. But in the mansub and the majzoom, we drop the noon, yaf'alu, taf'alu, taf'ali. That's called hadth and noon. So these are the markers. We can either have short vowels or the presence or the dropping of the noon. This is a quick review, a summary of lesson number 5 and the material we just covered in this session. We learned that the Arabic verbal noun is called the masdar, and this has the same meaning, roughly, equivalent to the word running in the sentence, running is fun. The Arabic verbal noun functions just like a noun would function. We learned the Arabic verb forms 2, 3, 4, and 5 in this lesson. Each form consists of a fixed, unique, past tense, present tense, and verbal noun pattern. And we used fa, ayn, and lam as the placeholder root. So here's a chart summarizing all 4 forms, forms 2, 3, 4, and 5. We learned that Arabic words can have either variable endings, mu'raba, or fixed endings, mabniya. Examples of mu'raba words include most, asma, nouns in Arabic, or the present tense verbs, al-af'al mudari'. Examples of words that are mabniya include past tense verbs, as well as pronouns, and the feminine plural, present tense verbs. So present tense verbs, al-af'al mudari', are all mu'araba. They all take variable endings depending on the presence of special factors, except for the feminine plural verbs, for hunna and antunna. Those are mabniya. What are the three present tense verb case endings? Al-marfu' is used in the absence of any special factors. It's the default form. Its markers are the dhamma or thubut an-nun. Al-mansub is used in the presence of nawasib such as an and lam ta'lil. Its markers are al-fatha and hadf an-nun. And last but not least, the majzoom case is used after jawazim such as lam and lam al-amr. Its markers are the sukun and hadf an-nun. So I want to apologize for cramming so much information into just a single lesson, but I sincerely tried my very best to teach everything in a clear way, by using flowcharts, by using diagrams, by using plenty of examples. Clarity is my number one priority in this video series. So if you have any feedback or any concerns, any questions, please do not hesitate to comment below on this video. Thank you so much for watching. Jazakumullahu khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.